Hi, welcome to the latest episode of the Wellbeing Show. I'm your host, Noel. Just so you know, it's pre-recorded now, not a live show. So don't call me on a Wednesday evening if you're watching this, because I'll probably be out doing something. I'm not very happy with you. But do send me a message, 07506 319 745. So WhatsApp me a message. If you've got questions or queries, if you've got questions for my fabulous guest, Christine, who's joined us, then just send them to me and I can pass them on to her. And I'm sure she'd be happy to sort of discuss and sort of answers with you via me. So do let me know. We'll give you Christine's website if she got. I didn't ask her if she's got one. I'm sure she's got one. A detail so you can contact her yourself via that as well. And we're going to be discussing an awesome topic, which is sort of broadly speaking, how psychotherapies have changed in the UK and vectored towards more evidence-based practices. And Christine's own personal story reflects that, which is really interesting. So we're going to have that conversation. And without further ado, hi, Christine. Thanks for joining me. How are you doing?
No, yeah, I'm great. Thank you. Nice to be here.
Great. We're both Brummies as well, which is always nice when I find a Brummie in my field.
Mm.
I'm from Birmingham. So thanks for joining me. We've just had a fantastic pre-show chat, getting to know each other. I'm going to try and replicate that. So you're an EMDR practitioner. Now, sort of, that's a bit of a mouthful, isn't it? EMDR. What is that, Christine, exactly?
So it stands for eye movement, desensitization, and reprocessing. Francine Shapiro, who originated this method, said she would just call it reprocessing therapy if she had her time over again.
Yes, I'm sure she would.
Because it allows you to reprocess a memory. A traumatic memory is an unfinished memory that just hangs there, liable to be re-triggered by something similar that then floods you with stress hormones, feels awful. But when it's been fully processed, it can be filed away with the case closed feeling. Yeah. So you know it, but it doesn't just drop into your awareness. You can get it if you want it. Otherwise, it stays where it is.
And my understanding, I'm not particularly trained in that field. I have staff who work for me who are, but my understanding is it does something about bilateral stimulation. Is that right? Moving information from one side of the brain to the other.
Well, the EM of EMDR, the eye movements, one way is to use eye movements with a broad sweep like this. The other is a tactile. So you have a buzzer that just alternates left, right, left, right. You can tap yourself left, right, left, right. So it's that bilateral.
Post-COVID days, there's computer-based ones, throwing a ball and catching it and stuff like that. Is that right? Or watching something on the screen? Some people use that.
More likely watching, because it has to be a regular rhythmic,
right,
even movement.
So it works through the screen as well. You don't necessarily have to be in the same room as somebody.
No, it works through the screen, and sounds as well.
Okay.
Left, right, beep. That will do it. I don't think there's full consensus on how and why this is working. But to me, what makes sense is it nudges your brain slightly into its dreaming mode, where the left and right hemispheres are working really well together to process information through all the channels, cognitive, visual, sensory motor, auditory. So like in a dream, all of those channels of processing are present.
Again, for people, I told you I was going to interrupt a lot, just for information. So dream is REM sleep. So there's two types of sleep, REM and non-REM, or deep and not deep. And two experiences that we get when we're sleeping. One is physical rest, which is the non-REM, and the other is psychological processing, which is the REM. Is that correct?
Yes.
And then during REM sleep and rapid eye movement sleep, it's called, or dream sleep. That's when we're dreaming and our eyes are going like that.
Yeah.
And during that time, information is being explored by the whole of the brain as much as possible to try and categorize it, understand it, file it. These types of processes are going on. Is that correct?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I don't know the detail here, but it is being moved, but I think it's being moved front to back.
As well. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. An unfinished memory is more at the front. In long-term storage, it goes to the back.
Yeah.
So it
So
feels.
that people know that we have a thing called a working memory, which is what we're using during the day. I think of it like this, which is because I have to think in these images, metaphors to remember stuff. I don't have a brain, particularly because of my own history of trauma. Memory is a weird thing. Sort of, other people have this thing called memory. I have my brain that works and the way it works. But if I think about working memory, I think of it as like a toilet cistern that slowly fills up with stuff during the day. It gets full, and then I have to pull the chain at night, and that's what happens. It gets drained out, and then that's that physical move, isn't it? So the working memory is more towards the front, and then the long-term memory, what we call learning from experience, is more towards the back. And the processes like the memory stack or long-term memory, there's different types of. And the idea is the brain is really good at automation, because if we were having to think about everything all the time, we'd freeze up. Like if you imagine trying to drive a car and having to think about everything you did. So
it'd be impossible.
You'd crash, you'd literally crash all the time. And so that's if you like, that's a really good example of when experience, short-term memory, has been moved to long-term memory. We don't need to think about it. It just happens automatically.
And I think talking about automation, I think one of the most critical automatic processes to consider is that the brain instantly will categorize something as safe or not safe.
Yes.
And so with the therapy, what we're aiming to do is recategorize something that was labeled not safe, but actually is safe. So that you just have so much more freedom to live fully. Absolutely.
And even if an experience wasn't safe, we can learn, well, it's in the past and it's not unsafe now. It's safe now because it's only a memory.
Yes. And of course, our brains will generalize, which has huge advantages, but also huge liabilities.
Yes.
You know, so a toddler who gets bitten by a dog will generalize to all dogs are dangerous, therefore avoid them. And a phobia gets set up.
So let's try and explain that bit, and then I want to talk a bit about you and what brought you into the work, because it's a fascinating story, if slightly disturbing at times as well. But it's a familiar story to me as to why people may come into this field, and some of the hope that's available in terms of healing and growth. Just talking about generalization, and a good example of that is things like phobic responses and why that's useful for us. But I've lost my train of thought, so I'm going to go back to talking about introducing your own sort of life experience, if that's all right. So you come from Birmingham, but you weren't born an EMDR practitioner. You've got a story, haven't you? Do you want to sort of tell us about that?
Yes. So years and years ago, I was working in Birmingham, very early in my career, working for an environmental charity. I was raped and then stalked in Birmingham.
Just going to stop there. So for people that may have experienced these things who haven't, like Christine, had sort of help to get over those fears, and you may be triggered by these words, rape, there are actually there's a possibility of healing, and Christine's going to demonstrate that. But this whole story may be difficult to hear. Just know that you're not alone if you're having difficulties hearing this story. These are things called triggers, which are well known in psychological therapy, and you can get help with. And it may be that if you haven't had help yet, you're experiencing things like You may get a flashback from your triggers. You may start remembering and have intrusive thoughts. You may well sort of start feeling like you're to blame, there's something wrong with you, that it's your fault, that you're bad. And you may have thoughts about sort of hurting yourself as well. All of those are understandable reactions to a really horrible thing that's happened to you. They're not the truth. They are what you are experiencing, but there is help available. So we will put up numbers for you to contact: Samaritans, Rape Crisis, other organizations that you can reach out to. And I would encourage you, if this is triggering you because you've had some experiences like that, to get hold of these safe organizations that will support and care for you, because that's what you need, is support and care. And certainly don't listen to those internal voices that tell you you did something wrong and that you should hurt yourself at all. Sorry, Christine, I always do this when we have these subjects.
That's really good. In my experience, EMDR is the best thing that you can use to deal with an acute crisis that leaves such a traumatic response as this.
It's the gold standard without doubt of treating those incidents of trauma that are overwhelming.
Yes.
So come back to your story. So you experienced this horrific, horrible thing, and then what was next? What happened next?
Well, I think I went through all of the responses that you've just described. You know, I thought it was probably my fault. I didn't think anyone could or would help me. I thought if I went to the police, first of all, I thought they wouldn't believe me. Then I thought, even if they did, even if it went to court, I wouldn't be safe. Because even if he was charged and convicted, I would only be safe for as long as he was in prison. Then he'd be out to finish the job. So I thought there was absolutely no point taking it further, until I'd been stalked in my lunch break in the centre of Birmingham a few times with death threats. You know, for instance, he would come up behind me, get my arm and say, if anything happened to you in the street, do you think anyone would help? I don't. And I thought, I don't. So at that point, I did go to the police, who had a file this thick, so they knew who it was. They said, you're like everyone else. You've brought us no evidence, so the best thing you can do is move. So I moved to London.
Can stop the conversation there. Just checking with you. Are you okay talking about this stuff? Great.
Yeah.
Wonderful. I want people to notice that Christine is absolutely okay talking about this stuff. I mean, this guy, that's right. This guy was deliberately trying to groom you to become a long-term victim of his, which is, and I know I've worked in forensic settings, and I've worked with offender patients who, some of whom were like this, violent offenders, violent sexual offenders. And this is what they do, you know, and often the police do know who these people are.
I think he was, I thought he was gearing up to kill me, which is why I moved.
Yeah.
But another dimension of it, which it was a racist attack. You know, what I said, you know, why? And when it was happening, he said, because you're white and perfect and I want to break you.
Yeah.
And so in that moment, I, of course, did not feel perfect at all. But I thought to myself, I'm not even a human being. I'm a possession in his mind,
right,
of a man who he wants to attack vicariously. So there were layers of weirdness and trauma involved in this. So anyway.
So we're just going to stop there as well, because it's really important that, because it's a complicated and difficult material for people to listen to. And again, I just want to reiterate, if it's bringing up issues for you, that it's really important to reach out, seek help. There's help out there. But also, I mean, I think it is, and again, thinking about this generalization thing that trauma does, because it would then be very easy at that point to generalize that the world is unsafe, all men are unsafe, all this are unsafe, all this, and I'm sure you did all of those things. But we do know that offenders are serial offenders mostly. I mean, that's what the evidence tells us, that the men, and it is men who will do this, tend to be serialized, and that's why the police have files like this. Okay, it's not all men, and it's not anything at all. It's not the world, although that is what our brain will naturally tell us, and the reason for that is our brain is trying to protect us.
Yes.
More primitive aspects of our brain. I presume you had those generalized feelings of fear and anxiety about lack of safety in the world, yeah?
Oh, totally. The world was not remotely safe. Inside my head was not safe. It was constant flashbacks. I had to scramble my brain to get some relief from the flashbacks. Yeah, everything was awful for a time.
Yeah. The police weren't able to help. Again, it's a tragedy that our criminal justice system fails so much, and we know it fails. It fails utterly to protect victims.
Well, yeah, but then when the police officer said to me, the best thing you can do is move, I was actually relieved at that, because I thought, well, he's believed me and he is giving me some practical advice.
Yeah.
Because I had expected not to be believed at all.
Yeah. So you were a certain perverse sense of validation. This really happened. This person really is dangerous. I need to get out of Dodge is the message that you got, which was a practical help.
Yes. So I drove down the M40 to London, crying all the way.
Yeah.
And lodged with a friend of a friend, got work, pretended to be normal, but had what I didn't realize at the time was derealization and depersonalization. So it was like I was in a thick glass jar. So I could see the world, but I couldn't connect with the world.
It's a very familiar story. I mean, people talk about that, viewing the world through a thick pane of glass, you know, and it becomes normal, and people don't understand that's a form of what we call dissociative type response. And tell me what dissociative responses mean. What's the sort of, you're much better at this stuff than me, so explain disassociation.
Well, I tend to think of it in a more woo-woo sense than the psychological sense.
It's probably more helpful.
I think it's not safe to be in your body. Your body can be attacked. You know, your body can be a place of pain and humiliation. So check out of it, float out of it, just zone out, go somewhere else.
Yeah.
And I used to go out of body when I was a kid, before I realized that was a weird thing to do. Yeah. And when I realized that was weird, then it didn't happen anymore. But yeah, there are all sorts of ways of zoning out and checking out and just not being there.
Numbing is one of them. I think a lot of kids will describe that numbing, and it makes sense of their sort of deliberate self-harming behaviors when you're understanding that numbing is part of it. I used to numb from my experiences, and oddly enough, it made me really good in a crisis.
Yeah.
Really helpful, because I was the one person who could be logical and thoughtful when everybody else was just gone absolutely haywire, because I wasn't feeling, I was like going, oh, okay, we'll do this, we'll do that.
That's just sparked the memory in me. I did a parachute jump, and my parachute didn't open properly. It was kind of, it was what they call a streamer, so it was out of its case, but it was in a column. So I was hurtling towards the floor, and so I knew this is what was going on, and my mind just split into two. So one part was screeching, oh my God, I'm going to die. And the other half was just super calm.
Yeah.
So it just said, just fiddle around with the strings, just put your hands up there, and, you know. So I did. And then it went,
And it does make sense of why we do these types of things, why our mind has evolved these strategies. I had a similar thing when I was scuba diving and I was running out of air. You know, if I panicked, I wouldn't be here today. But I went completely numb and calm and remembered the training and told the instructor, I'm going to stop breathing soon. Can you help?
Yes.
Which, when you're underwater, is not a very helpful state.
Oh.
You know what I mean? So that these things, and again, I do think about these approaches as, you know, they are incredibly creative and useful strategies by the mind in these extreme circumstances, and they make absolute sense in the extreme circumstances. What the problem comes, I think, is that they become symptoms that interfere with non-extreme life. And ideally, life is not extreme, right? Ideally, life is pretty normal and boring.
Yes. Well, the way it seems to me is that we've evolved these different mechanisms for survival.
Yes, yes.
But we've not evolved the kill switch. You know, once they're in, like armor plating on a medieval knight, the suit of armor is great for the battle. It's not great if you just can't take it off at the end of the battle.
It's not great when you want to jump in the bath and relax.
No.
That's not great at all, is it?
No. And if the armor's been on for a long time,
yeah,
it's like you think it's you. And the idea of taking it off is alarming because you think you'd be so vulnerable without it, but then you'd be so free without it, you know, to run around and just use up less energy lugging yourself around the whole time.
Yeah, and literally to be able to relax and take it easy. Do you know what I mean? Which is what we do need to be able to do that. And polyvagal stuff tells us that with these two nervous systems, the active and the relaxed one, and we need that balance. And one of the features, I think, of trauma is that if you're always active, you're always scanning, you're always looking for danger, you're always in a sense of threat.
So much energy that you could be using in other more creative ways.
Absolutely. I want people to notice how, because this is a feature of our conversation prior to the show, but to notice how Christine is talking about this stuff and she's gone beyond even that notion of being a survivor into somebody who's thriving in her environment. And that's the hope of appropriate help. If you get appropriate evidence-based psychological therapies, you can recover without a doubt, and you can go on to have a wonderful life. And so if anybody's listening to this and you're thinking, oh God, I'm stuck in this horrible situation forever, you're not.
No.
You went on to train initially as a psychotherapist, and I'm going to use this as an apocryphal story, but you know where I'm going with this. So tell me about your initial training. You didn't really train in EMDR initially, did you? You decided, like me, you decided to become a therapist because if you didn't, you were going to go bonkers and lose the plot. So it was about healing yourself, I guess, right?
Yes. Well, I'll just say as well, you can only train in EMDR if you are already trained as a psychotherapist, a psychologist, or a psychiatrist. So it's a necessary first step.
And the reasoning is, just so that people know?
Well, you need a huge body of knowledge before you go in to use these tools safely.
Yeah. Okay. So you started training as a psychotherapist. Tell us about that.
Do you want the train bit first, or as in?
However you want to say it, to be honest, Christine, whatever comes to mind right now, and just in response to that. So,
right.
Especially your story, you're working in London, you've got to London, you're working in London, but you're sort of in survival mode, I guess, and you're looking for help, right?
And because it was awful, it was daily, nightly flashbacks and just a very difficult situation. I think part of the thing about trauma and depression as well is that it alters your relationship with the future. So at that time, all I could see was more pointless torture. and I couldn't see a solution.
Yeah.
I couldn't imagine being understood or being helped. So I just thought, okay, I've had enough of this. I'm checking out now, and decided to go under a train. Ashamed to say, didn't give a thought to the train driver at that time. I've since worked with train drivers who've had the hideous experience of having someone die in front of their train. So in that moment of hearing the train coming, I had a vision of my parents being told, and thought, okay, I can't do that to them, so I'm going to be here. So I better make myself useful. Had a few sessions of counselling, which put me on the road to recovery. The experience of someone tolerating me when I couldn't tolerate myself was enormously beneficial.
Yeah. Mind-blowing, I should imagine.
Yes. Yeah.
Does somebody else survive this thing that I know I can't survive? I mean, that's a quite extraordinary experience.
It helped me feel less toxic, less weird, less defective. It helped me to normalize the experience as you said before, not my fault. I just thought I was.
It's an interesting concept here. I mean, this is not exactly what happens, but that notion of I'm so toxic, I'm destructive is very familiar, I think, to people who've had really horrible things happen to them. And that notion of this damage that I am will destroy. And some early practitioners who are, they're not necessarily evidence-based, but they are intuitively correct, I think. And I think about, Klein's notion of the child believing that they will destroy the caregiver.
Yeah.
How catastrophic that thought would be. The idea that I could destroy any possibility of being looked after would be a terrifying thought.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's surprisingly widespread.
Yes.
Because if you feel toxic, obviously you want to hide that. And so it takes some quite deep work with a really good working alliance for that to be even, even the very idea of revealing any of that.
Yes.
You need to provide a really safe holding environment, and with the evidence-based psychological education that this is something that can be worked with and can be.
Absolutely. So I'm bringing this to the fore simply because I know if people are listening to this, I want you to understand, because the way we emotionally identify is really important. And if people can understand, even with a deep sense of toxicity and destructivity, that you can get help. It doesn't really is. That's a feeling that you have, folks. It's not a fact. It's not a fact that anybody is so toxic that they will destroy the possibility of love. The other thing about suicidal ideation, which is that impulse to jump under the train, I remember once having that impulse, and I was lucky in that I had a lot of phone numbers to call, and I've been trained into making those phone calls. And there are organizations that you can contact who you can call in immediate crises. Samaritans comes to mind. Always a good number to have on speed dial, folks. And so if you feel an overwhelming impulse, and there aren't those good enough objects which Christine had in her mind to go to and say, I can't hurt them, my mum and dad, organizations like Samaritans can take that place. They really can. And make that call before you make a permanent decision.
One of the awful things about, as I mentioned, about depression is it convinces you that there is nothing good to come.
Yeah.
And it's such a distortion of the truth.
Absolutely. It's wrong. It's fundamentally incorrect. It's not factual at all. It's extraordinary. And it's also that thing, and I know you have an interest in story and myth and experience, and you've got to ask yourself this question: is it rationally possible that people have not survived these things, because this stuff, awful things have been happening throughout human history, and yet we're still here. So somehow we found ways through this stuff. And there are, I mean, modern psychological methods, I think, quicken that healing experience. They're really great for that. Coming on to, so you were having these experiences, you're experiencing life as awful. You have a seed sown through these 6 sessions from your GP that there was at least a possibility that somebody could survive you.
Yes.
What did you do next? What was the sort of next steps for you?
Well, this is very much a cliche, but I thought to myself, if I'm going to be here, I'm going to be useful. And having experienced depression and how catastrophically awful depression is,
Yeah.
I thought, well, if I can help even one person get out of it, then that's something. So did my training at Regents College in integrative psychotherapy, focusing on psychodynamic psychotherapy. So the
Lots of words there. Let's try and explain some of those. So integrative, my understanding is it's a school of thought, but it's also an attitude, isn't it? About you pick and
drawing
choose.
on bits and pieces, drawing on things that seem to make sense, you know.
Yeah.
So my other one was existential,
Yeah.
which is how you make meaning in life, how you make the choices that you make.
And psychodynamic?
So psycho meaning mind, and dynamic movement. So how the forces of the unconscious push and pull against one another. You know, you've got basically reaching drives and inhibiting drives, and it's just in simple form a stop-go system, but also in Freudian terms the aggressive drives, you know, the greedy, hostile, those survival drives that tend to get squashed and denied, and the superego drives of being nice and socialized and fitting in, and then the ego mediates between.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Thanks for the explanation. So you're doing this quite broad, complex psychotherapy training. And how did you experience it in terms of your trauma and your depression, etc.?
It was really great to get some knowledge. It was really great to be in a group with people from all kinds of different backgrounds, because at the time you had to be 30 or older to train, because you needed some life experience. And there were all kinds of people with all kinds of wonderful life experience. So that was very affirming. You also needed to be in your own personal therapy while you were training. My therapist was very much pushing me to accept that I'd been sexually abused as a child when I knew I hadn't.
Yeah.
So,
the so-called recovered memory syndrome thing.
Yes. I mean, I'd had a child by the time I was training, and I made a flippant comment that labour was painful and awful, and I wished I could have had an out-of-body experience. And he seized upon that as evidence that I'd been sexually abused as a child.
Oh.
And he was giving me books to read. I was dutifully reading them, coming back saying, very interesting, but not me. So he'd shake his head and say, you're not ready for the memories to surface.
Yeah.
And then
do you mind if I interject at this point? I mean, if somebody's listening to this and you have a therapist any health professional trying to tell you that program your mind, it's not safe space. I'm saying that as a professional. You need to end that relationship. Go and seek a professional who isn't going to try and program your mind into what they believe is going on. And particularly this whole recovered memory stuff is, you know, I don't think there's so much of it around at the moment, but it was rife for a while. And it was the sort of last death throes of some professionals trying to push a theory of human development onto us, which is just not true. So it does come from sort of post-Freudian thought and Freudian thought, and we should know that Freud himself had his own issues and that affected his views of the world. It's almost certainly the case. I think Freud was sexually abused, hence he wrote all these theories about it, because we know that children who are interfered with sexually tend to sexualize their relationships. That's what happens. It changes our personality. And the model that we're going to discuss, the evidence-based model, is much more useful in thinking about sort of how our mind is shaped by traumatic experiences. So I just want to put that out there. And I say that as a regulated therapist, drama therapist. That's my original training. I'm regulated in that. And therefore, it's about protecting the public. And so if you're seeing a practitioner who's trying to force a theory onto you, end the relationship and find somebody who won't.
It's very important, because I didn't think at that point I needed therapy. I was jumping through the hoops for my training as far as I was concerned at that point. And I started to come under the spell. I started to think, oh, maybe he knows something that I don't know. And even a weird feeling of specialness about it. Luckily for me, I had a conversation with my sister who said, don't be ridiculous. Of course you weren't. And that jolted me back into reality. If I'd made accusations, it would have destroyed my dad. It would have been catastrophic. So I made a complaint that was handled in a very mealy-mouthed, slight, tiny little slap on the wrist kind of a way, but then did what you said and ended the relationship. But it has made me very, very aware to be ethical at all stages and do no harm, and not assume that you know something that you don't actually know.
Yeah, there is a long, I mean, it's not just that therapist. There's a long history in all mental health services of abuse of power, you know, and it happens at every level. I mean, women used to be hospitalized routinely through theories about their defectiveness. I worked with women in learning disability hospitals who didn't have learning disabilities but pretended they did, because when they were younger, they'd given birth out of marriage and therefore were incarcerated in learning disability hospitals. Because I worked on these hospital closure programs and I met those women, you know, who that had happened to. We've had all sorts of abusive practices, and it's really important that people understand the difference between abuse of power and ethical practice. And ethical practice really means that the practitioner is open to being challenged. They can demonstrate why they're doing something, show you the evidence for it, talk to you about the outcomes, and talk to you about who holds them account professionally, who will take them apart, you know. So I'm regulated by the Health and Care Professions Council from my training as a drama therapist. And if people have a problem with my practice, they go to them. And they're there to protect the public. This do no harm thing is really crucial, I think.
Yes.
Particularly with people who are very vulnerable because of trauma. But nevertheless, your training was useful in terms of getting you to a certain place. And then you sort of found that it wasn't dealing with what you needed it to deal with. Is that right? Would that be a fair summary?
Yes. I found these sort of endless digging for more problems rather than finding solutions.
Right.
Thematic. And this is where EMDR comes in, because it's very, very solution focused. It's very simple in its essence. We're looking for current problems in 4 broad areas. I'm not safe. I'm not good enough. I'm powerless. It's my fault. And then having identified, you know, what's not working now, what would you prefer to be different now? Then we go back to find the origins of these dysfunctional patterns of thought, to rework them.
Yeah.
And we're using memory and fiction but in a very explicit way. So say we're reworking a childhood memory of being subject to parental violence. We would bring in a team, nurturing figures, protector figures, a wise figure, to explicitly reprocess that memory. So for me, I think in pictures, it's like having potholes in the road. It's a very bumpy, uncomfortable ride. So you put a new layer of nice, smooth tarmac over that road, and you can peel it back and find the original potholes if you want. But why would you when you've got something much nicer to land on first?
Yeah.
As in the reworked memory.
And from a theoretical psychological perspective, my understanding, and this is how I shifted from sort of digging around to working very much with things that would help me improve my life. There was something about I needed a toolkit. I needed to be able to function better. In sort of early psychological theory, it's that shift from having to imagine or framing experience as something whereby if you dig into it and find the root cause, then you suddenly magically heal, right? As opposed to what the evidence suggests is that if you can manage this moment better, then the moment in the future is likely to be better.
Yes.
Going forwards,
yes,
your psychological development is more effective, more flexible, broader, allows you to become much more pro-social, engage in the world in ways that make you feel good about yourself, where you respect yourself more, etc., etc. And if you can do that, then the future is of necessity going to be better for you because you acquire skills that allow you to be successful in the world as opposed to successful in your own mind. It's something like that. That's how I think about it. Does that resonate?
Yes, it does. And I think it encompasses like basic beliefs about the self.
Yeah.
You know, so children who've been abused or neglected tend to internalize, I'm bad. You know, it's my fault. There's something wrong with me. I'm an idiot. There's a whole long list of things that kids will internalize. And it's better to be the bad child of good parents than the good child of bad parents.
Yes. Explain that because it's such a fundamental truth. I mean, it's maybe shocking to people to hear this, but can you tell me what that means?
So say you're a 4-year-old child and your parents are not treating you well. They're shouting or hitting or whatever they're doing. So if you see yourself as the bad child, it makes sense of their behavior. It makes it more logical. And it leaves you with some hope, because if you learn how to be a better child, then they'll become better parents. And so it lets you tolerate the situation and have some hope for the future. Whereas if you see yourself as the good child of bad parents, it's overwhelmingly terrifying because you are trapped with mad, bad people who have huge power over you.
Yeah. So it's like that abusive stalker has got hold of you and taken over your life. Yeah. Then there's no possibility, is there? Right.
No.
And the long-term consequences for a child in that situation, I guess, would be thinking about patterning, thinking about automation, would be that then they go through life adopting the strategies that will reinforce that.
Yes.
And so later on in life, as they grow, they find people that are not nurturing, not helpful, that reinforce these internal sort of messaging that they have. Is that correct?
I think you just get onto the hamster wheel of the same problems and the same pain again and again and again. And I think this is what Gabor Mate describes really well in some of his videos on attachment versus authenticity.
Right. Tell us about attachments. It's an interesting way because you overlay your work now in EMDR with attachment understanding as well. Yeah. So tell us about attachment, what that is essentially from your perspective.
If you were lucky enough to grow up in a psychologically and physically safe household, you're likely to be securely attached, meaning you can relate to people on a very upfront basis. You can bring your whole self to their whole self and have as an adult to adult, productive, enjoyable
So
relationship.
attachment literally is that word. It's a cold word, which means the range of emotional bonds between me and another person for good or ill.
Yes. So there are various different forms of insecure attachment where, so as a child, you are dependent for your survival upon your parents or caregivers. If they are also attacking or also neglectful or problematic or volatile or unpredictable, then the attachment to them is both necessary for your survival, but also puts you in the danger zone. So you have to develop strategies for managing the danger.
So I want to describe to people how profoundly important attachment is. So a newborn baby is born with 5 things that they can do for their survival: rooting, grasping, suckling, tracking, and smiling. That's what a newborn baby has generally. They are very much about grasping, is about an old thing about holding on to the person who's going to feed you and care for you. So if you get baby's fingers, they do that. You know, if you do it to their feet, they'll try and do that because we used to be monkeys, or sort of like monkeys, and our feet will try to do that, but they won't anymore. Rooting is literally looking for the breast to feed. So a baby will do that. Will start pulling your clothes apart because it wants some nosh. Grasping, rooting, suckling is babies have no gag reflex. I don't know if you've ever seen a baby feeding on a breast. The breast is down here, so they don't choke. But later on, they get hiccups and they develop so grasping, rooting, sucking. Tracking is, and these are the social attachment things. Tracking is a baby is primed to notice human-shaped things and track them because of this next thing that they do, which they practice in utero when nobody is there. This primary social attachment. If a baby smiles, just think about you. You look at a baby that smiles, you automatically go, oh, you have these warm, loving feelings towards them. And so a baby is programmed to get those warm, loving feelings out of you, to form attachments, because they depend on you to survive. That's how deep this stuff is. Mother Nature's programmed. We practice in utero when there's nobody there. You can see these wonderful videos of in utero fetuses practicing smiling and stuff like that. Sorry, Kristen, you're going to say?
Oh, that just made me think of the blank face experiments that were done in psychology labs. And how quickly babies get distressed if you're not smiling.
Yeah, absolutely. They upset me. I don't like to see babies upset. They get over it. They're very resilient. That's just me being a softie. But it is really important, this stuff, that we understand that a rupturing and difficulties within attachment processes can be quite significant. But also we can overcome them. And again, this is the difference between previous old psychological methods and the modern evidence-based psychological methods, is that we understand this thing called neuroplasticity and neurogenesis. We know that our brains can shape and evolve going forwards. And our personalities, even if they've been encoded at a very early age by difficult things, we can reprogram our personalities through what we do and through the choices that we make in our relationships with other people. You would want to say something about that?
I was thinking of one of the EMDR conferences a while ago. Anna Gomez, who does EMDR with young children, she does brilliant work. they've had their attachments very, very ruptured, so that they are phobic of their own needy selves and will attack neediness in themselves.
Yeah, totally. Makes absolute sense. Yes.
So she uses the sand tray with toys and figures, and will repair the attachment with them. And she'll do the left, right with a paintbrush on their hand. So she'll watch.
Really? Wow.
Play.
How exciting.
Yeah, it's so good. So at first, they're like bashing the baby toys. Then if she can get to a point where they can recognize, she'll say, what might that baby need? And the child might say some milk. So as soon as something good, she'll go to affirm it. So it's encoding in the nervous system, that this is normal. Needing something is normal. And then it's building up to loving is normal. Loving means this. Caring, gentle. It doesn't mean hitting and shouting. Doesn't mean anything sexualized. So it's really rewiring and reprocessing these deep meanings and patterns.
Yeah, I'm letting you know that we're coming to the point where the show will be wrapping up. I told you it would go. Everybody says, what? Is this the end? But we're just giving you the heads up so it doesn't shockingly interrupt the discussion. So again, sort of to get people to understand this is that human beings are like a lot of mammals. Because of our social nature, we can change. And what we do in the world with our social interactions, or we have done to us with skilled professionals in social interactions. And this is a sort of this is the scientific basis of why evidence-based approaches work in psychological therapies. Is that it's having a direct impact on the shaping of the brain of the patient and also of the therapist, to be honest, because of this endless process of change that is happening in our minds. And our minds means brain as well. There's physical things are happening, which are, and also these processes that you're describing, Christine, that people should understand is they are, they're backwards and forwards in the brain, but they're up and down as well, because the brain has evolved over a long period of time. And it goes from the brain stem to the midbrain to, we're talking, the processes here, we're talking about the upper brain, higher functioning. And it's about the connections between those bits of the brains as well.
So EMDR works on something called adaptive information processing. So we infer that the brain wants to process information in an adaptive way. And sometimes it gets stuck and information is maladaptive. So I see this as, if you could lay out the cortex as a big circuit board, there are big complex circuits containing adult information about the self and the world. There are little child circuits containing simplistic, often wrong information. So EMDR allows the merging of these circuits so that the adaptive information can flow into the maladaptive and update it.
Right.
And create a big network that then remains. It doesn't slide back to its original position.
And that's crucial. People should really, it's a really crucial thing about sort of modern evidence-based practices is that the changes are pretty permanent. When you do these things, you are literally rewiring because it's more useful. And the brain is nothing if not pragmatic.
Absolutely.
And if you give it something that's much more useful, flexible, adaptive, it will just default to that. And it will, even if you've had these maladaptive experiences, they just go. And it's one of the things about sort of why these things are really useful, even short periods of time, like classic EMDR would be relatively short number of sessions, but you're working on models of EMDR that are longer sessions, and we haven't got that much time, but we're going to introduce a couple of new terms. So you've got post-traumatic stress, which people, I think, know the terms for now. Prince Harry has introduced us to these things and so on and so forth. But you've got, there's another one. So you've got PTSD, which is what people would probably sort of understand, but then you've got another one, which is CPTSD, complex post-traumatic stress responses or adaptations. I mean, the terminology is discussed, but complex meaning really from...
Well, this is where, again, early in life, all of the necessary survival attachments have been so compromised. So that I think you then see the world and relationships through all kinds of distorted filters. The relationship to the self is compromised, as well as the relationship to other people. And you know, I'm bad, I'm defective. That gets played out and kind of made true through all of this complex PTSD. And so this is why...
Try and explain that to people in a straightforward way. So if you think about, so it's behavioral reinforcement, really, that's what you're discussing from my perspective. And so if we think about in the UK, there aren't spiders that can actually hurt you, but you can get very afraid of spiders. And you get to that point because something happens with a spider at some point that makes you sort of anxious, a little bit anxious. Next time you see a spider, your brain then goes, this made you anxious before, is it dangerous? Because you're not realizing it's asking you a question. It's more, you experience it as a statement, you behaviorally reinforce that, and you react a bit more in a slightly more exaggerated way that reinforces spiders are dangerous, and gradually over time that builds up. You reinforce to the point where you can literally be jumping out of your skin as something that is completely harmless to us. Yeah,
well, yes, and I think it seems to me there are three broad types of defense mechanisms.
Yeah.
So avoid that, distort that, compensate for that.
Yeah.
And when you're avoiding the spiders, say, you don't get the reality testing to update your templates, and the avoidance keeps the fear in place. Same with distortions, really. I know we're off on a different topic here, and if you're compensating as a default way of keeping safe, you're again keeping all kinds of attachment styles and limiting beliefs.
Yeah. Again, it's really important knowledge for people to have. And again, I would say it's all part of safe practice that you want, when you're working with somebody, that you want them to be able to, like Christine, be able to just simply explain stuff.
There has
this
to
is what
be
goes on.
Otherwise, it's just kind of smoke and mirrors.
It really is. It really is. And so it's really important stuff. It's also because I'm excited and interested, Christine, so I go for all sorts of tangents. That's my untreated ADHD probably sort of going, so coming back to this idea of complex, deeply embedded trauma and trauma responses that are so deeply embedded, they're just me, they're not trauma, this is how I am. What are you talking about? This is trauma. How could this be? It's who I am. Right. That's what sort of how I understand complex PTSD. Yeah. That these maladaptive defenses, which are survival mechanisms to a horrible situation, become who I am, as opposed, and then I get caught up in repetitions of those experiences. I'm reinforcing, but they are difficult to treat with classic formulations of EMDR because, you know, it's not a discrete event.
No, it's a whole, the way I see it is you have to relay the foundations of your inner world.
Right.
Then build upon that. And so this is why...
and based upon that knowledge Christina gave us earlier, folks, which is that adaptive rewiring. So there's a process of identifying where that needs to be. And it's definitely not the same as going backwards in time to find the root cause. It's about rewiring the process. And for you, that comes from this approach adapting and utilizing attachment insights, and which again are evidence-based approaches to psychological therapies, right? So the bringing in of those attachment understandings is crucial. Do you think, Christine? Is that the point?
So this is where EMDR is blended slightly with hypnotherapy. Laurel Parnell brought her hypnotherapy background to EMDR with the great use of nurturing figures and protector figures and a wise figure, because they give the feeling of it being safe to connect and the feeling of being a worthy enough person to protect. So good enough, safe enough is fostered by the use of these protector figures and nurturing figures.
So then have internal experiences. You might call them objects or figures or ideas, mental constructs that are kind as opposed to cruel.
Absolutely. And it makes all the difference. Yeah. So subjectively, you can just relax into being in the moment. You can relax into being yourself. You can relax into trusting your judgment. This is when you've done a bit of work to build up, this new foundation. The world itself can become a benign place rather than a great big torture chamber.
So again, I want to explain to people why this is important, and I'll explain in the way I understand it, which is not particularly technical. So if you think about an infant that's born, and all parents will know this, you've got a newborn infant, you leave the room, they're immediately freaked out. And it takes ages for them to learn that you leaving the room doesn't mean that you're dead or you're never coming back or they're abandoned, because what happens is they internalize you and the experience of you so that they can then, not consciously, it's not a thought through process because they don't have language, but they have a physical experience of that you continue to exist inside, and therefore they can manage fear and anxiety that you're not physically in front of them. They can soothe themselves. They can self-soothe and hold on to a sense of it. It's not a disaster, that it's okay, that it is safe. Is that something along those lines?
Yes, definitely. And soothing, if you take that to its essence, is a belief that you're good enough, strong enough,
exactly,
good enough, you can cope. And it's a belief in the future as well. Something is coming that's okay.
It's a very sort of not very well known aspect of the diagnosis of PTSD, which is this thing that's called foreshortening, which is something that you talked about earlier on. You experienced it, and it's a classic sign that somebody has a trauma functioning. Is there's no sense of the future, or the future is brought here. They don't project ahead to, and it's just here, and it's bleak, it's grey, it's devoid of colour and joy and anything like that. It's slightly different to the depressive sort of view, but it's a very interesting feature. And once you start working with this, then suddenly people start to see a future. And they're going, oh, wow. And they start to have a horizon to their experience of life. We're going to have to sort of leave it there. We're at the end of the time. It's been a real joy for me to have you on. If people want to know more about what you're doing, how do they get hold? Have you got a website that people can see your work?
My website is pearsontherapy.com.
Yeah.
It's absolutely worth looking at the EMDR Association website. And also emdrfocus.com, which is my supervisor's website. It has lots of good information. That's for the attachment informed side of things.
So folks, this has been a really complex or very professional technical thing, which I hope we've presented in a way that's accessible as well. Sorry, I interrupt you, Kristen. I'll come back to you about that. But also, it's been a show that has touched upon some difficult and complex issues that may be triggering for you. So again, I want to remind you that, if you've been having difficult emotional responses and psychological responses while you've been listening because you have unprocessed traumatic events in your life, just to remind you that there is help. Don't make decisions that will permanently damage you, that whatever it is, you can get the treatment that you need. Christine has pointed, certainly her website herself, as an ethical, well-trained, experienced practitioner. The other websites that she's mentioned, but I remind people of the support groups, Rape Crisis, Samaritans. There's always hope, folks. You don't have to feel hope to know there is hope.
That's such a good point. I was also going to mention Parnell Institute.
Okay.
Parnell Institute is Laurel Parnell's US-based website, but she has an international directory on that one.
Brilliant. Absolutely fantastic. A real genuine pleasure to have you with us on the show. We have to leave it there. We're slightly overrun, but I don't care. So the rules are there to be broken as far as I'm concerned. You stay there. Bye-bye, folks. We'll see you at the next show. Again, just to remind you, if you have questions and thoughts and you want to share them, get hold of me on WhatsApp, 07506 319 745. And I think this is going out before Christmas, or it might go out in the new year, I'm not sure. But if it goes out before Christmas, Merry Christmas.